best understand cryptocurrencies, you first have to understand the platform and technology on which they are created. The technology is called blockchain. I'm going to simplify what blockchain is, because if you looked up the definition, it would read something like this.
A blockchain is a database that is maintained by a network of users and secured through cryptography. When new information is added to the database, it is organized in blocks, which can be thought of as containers for this data. Every so often, a new block is created and linked to a chain of previously created blocks. Each block has a unique ID called a hash that is created by running the ID of the block that preceded it and the data stored in the current block through a cryptographic algorithm. This ensures the integrity of all the data stored on the blockchain because altering the data in any block would produce a different hash.
Now, how many of you got that? Yeah, me neither. Did you see my head spinning? So please allow me to simplify it for you. Now, when the internet first came out, we didn't understand that either. It was pretty complex. And all we knew is that we could get mail on our computer instead of sending real physical mail. And we could find information on so many topics just by typing it in. Something called a search engine. Now, we can't live without the internet. And even if we don't fully understand it, we know that it's basically all about information and the distribution of information to us. So based on this concept, I would say that blockchain is the internet of value. Now let me explain. Right now, to transfer money to another country, you need to go through a middleman. Let's call the middleman, in this case, a bank. Now the transaction can take like a few hours to a few days, depending on the price you're willing to pay the bank. Now, it will not fully be settled in your account for a few days at least after that. Needless to say, this transaction is not cheap because the bank has to move many things around, and depending on other banks and other institutions, they have to make this transaction happen and register it properly in the various ledgers. I know it sounds complex. So the blockchain at its core is like a ledger, one that's not only decentralized, but it's distributed, meaning that it lives on many computers all over the world. And it's not owned by one person, one institution, one company. It's accessible by anybody, making it very hard to disrupt all at once, maybe by a cyber attack, for example. Now, in this ledger, you're going to find pieces of data organized in blocks. Now, once a block reaches its storage capacity, it gets chained to a separate block. And that's where we call chains. Get it? Blockchain, To link it or chain it to the prior block, the information stored in the prior block has to be run through a cryptography algorithm. Now, this gives you a number, a record called a hash, and then it's time-stamped. So this hash is going to appear in the following block of data. Now, if you're getting confused, so am I. So stick with me till the end of the video, and I guarantee it's going to sound extremely simple. Let's just recap really quickly. We've got a block, like a storage unit, that fills up with data or fills up with clothes. When it's full, you buy the storage unit next to it and you start filling it up. And then maybe you link them together. So that's how we get to like the blockchain. Okay, if any information is changed in a block, right? If you take out clothes, put in clothes, a new hash is going to be produced. And this will be known as something changed after the blockchain was full. Now, because this hash has changed, the next set of blocks are also going to change. They're going to be invalid because the data has changed and made their hashtag that they're referring to invalid. So it's like if you take out clothes from your storage unit and you put in electronic equipment, and then somebody says, oh, go in my storage unit and take out my clothes. The clothes are no longer there. It's disruptive. It's not going to work. All right, but let's get back to the blockchain. But for those who check these hashes and oversee them and make sure they're correct, why does it matter? All right, because people with blockchain network running their computers, or basically your peers, are the ones that validate this data, or the hashes. They're called miners. and they get compensated for running these complex algorithms. Now let's use the most famous blockchain that both you and I know about as an example. That would be Bitcoin. Now Bitcoin, it started using a blockchain back in 2009. But this was not the first use of a blockchain. Stick around, I'm gonna tell you when the first blockchain was created and where it shows up. All right, back to Bitcoin. Why was it important to have miners validate the hashes? Now let's say Tom, he's got 4 Bitcoin and he sends 1 Bitcoin to Mary. Now this transaction would be recorded in a block and it has a hash that would be created. Now Tom tries to sell John 4 Bitcoin. The transaction would be denied. Now why? Because the hash from the last block shows that Tom only has 3 Bitcoin left. Bad Tom. Now this transaction would be caught by many computers running algorithms all over the world within the blockchain, and it would be instantaneous. The fee to transfer blockchain is also much lower than if you used a middleman, or as my example, the banks. Now there are so many blockchains today. Bitcoin has one, Ethereum has one, even Dogecoin has one. And they can be used for many purposes, not only to handle cryptocurrencies. Now let me tell you, a great example of that would be smart contracts, which run through Ethereum blockchain. But yes, let's leave that one for a future video. Now let me tell you that the first blockchain showed up 13 years before Bitcoin, and it's been hiding in plain sight. It's been printed in the weekly classified section of the New York Times under lost and found notices by a company called Surety. And that was started by the inventors of blockchain, Stuart Haber and Scott Stormetta. Now, blockchains get pretty complex, but I try and simplify things as much as possible, just like I do in my options video right there. So go, check it out, start implementing the knowledge, and let's make that money.